Hello, all. Whoops. There we go. Presumably, we are on. And I think I see the chat. Yay. Ooh, and I just got an alert that I'm in here doing a open forum on herby stuff. All right. Well, we're going to get started in 2 minutes? 3 minutes. And if I'm lucky, I can find the chat box. But as it says in the front end there, let us know who you are, where you're from. We do have a crap ton of questions already lined up this morning. Wow, we already got 3 people on. Yay, you go. But you know what? Put them on down there. If you got any questions, I can scribble like a fool. And we will do our very best to get to any questions and make it all happen. I'll just talk faster. All right, everybody's loading on. All right, we're going to get started here in 3 minutes. Okay, I said that a minute ago, but really I'm looking at the clock. And I hate it when it doesn't let me see the chat box and the camera to see how silly I look on the camera. So thank you all for joining. Make sure there's not another way to do this. I swear every time I do this, they change the whole system. So last time it was awesome. Ooh, expand comments. Maybe that's what I want. Yeah, there we go. I don't know. We're going with it. And so I see there's a bunch of you on there. Let me know who you are, where you're from. Feel free to put any questions in there. We're going to get started in just a minute. Ooh, look at that. I made it work. I can see the chat box and myself now. Awesome sauce. And we're going to get started right at 6 o'clock, and I will do my station identification. And then we got all kinds of interesting stuff. I see glutathione, some dog care stuff, prostate, pregnancy, herbs, language of TCM, hormone stuff, malaria. Did I say glutathione? Glutathione. Okay, I think that was everything. And if you're a first time here, especially, I just assume my usuals are on here. And if you get, it did just start raining here, hallelujah. But, hey, Tammy. But if you, awesome, who's that? Rhea, sorry, I can't read, save my life. Yeah, right, I know. I'm going to have to talk fast to cover all this junk, huh? But we do this every month, on the last Friday of every month. Needless to say, if you gotta go, if you get cut off, it's not as much fun. But I do post this on the school's YouTube page after the fact. So I know people have lives and have to eat dinner, and I'm probably not that exciting to listen to during dinner. I'm sure you could come up with something better. But know that it's always on there. Ooh, and we got less than a minute. Yay! All right, and awesome. I already see some new names, so I like it. All right, I think I am caught up. I think I got it figured out. Find out soon enough. And it's 6 o'clock. All right, well, if you don't know it, I'm Bob Linde. I'm an acupuncture physician and a registered herbalist with the American Herbalist Guild. And I am the creator, director, whatever you want to call it, of the Tradition School of Herbal Studies, as well as, what is it? Oh, yes, the clinical practices, acupuncture and herbal therapies here in sunny St. Petersburg. And, we started this insanity, wow, it's been a couple years now, during COVID, because I really felt disconnected from my community and wanted to make sure that education continued, that I was reaching out to a larger audience, because a lot of people were really feeling isolated. So, yay, COVID's over, and I decided that it was really doing good stuff, and I had a lot of people that really seemed to enjoy it, participate, so I kept going. And so until I get exhausted or overwhelmed, I'll probably keep doing it, because it's kind of fun to try to download everything that's in my brain space in 2 hours or less. So, I always like to make sure that we talk about some of the classes that are coming up for those of you, and all of our classes, although it's certainly better live and in person. It's a downpour out there. It's always better live and in person, but I want to say almost all of our classes are online, that we live stream them on Zoom, and then we send you the recording as well. You've got access to the recording. I know with a lot of our students, it's always interesting, like, life gets in the way, they can't make it, they don't feel well, they got to travel for work or something. And so with all of our classes, if you've taken a class before, you're encouraged actually to sit through that class 2 or 3 times. We've actually had some people who've taken some of the classes 5 or 6 times, which is a little bit much. I don't think it's that interesting, but okay, it is that interesting. And I wish I could sit back through my, hey, Rhea. Oh, awesome. That's exciting. So classes that are coming up, August 3rd, which I can't believe is next week. That's ridiculous. Our medicine making classes that Ruthie does. We've got chamomile. There's so much coolness that you can do with chamomile. I will resist the temptation, and I don't want to spoil surprise, but chamomile is such an underrated herb, and it is truly magical. I would put that. Everybody always says, if you were on a deserted island and you could only choose 3 herbs, I'd probably forget chamomile myself, but that would probably belongs in that list. It belongs in our first aid kit. It belongs in our tea cabinet, you name it. So August 3rd, sorry. And then our anatomy and physiology for the herbalist, we have the urinary system is August 10th. And the young person's herbal classes, which is, again, this is Ruthie. She's trying to really start to engage those young teens to early 20s and get them excited about herbal medicine. Get them when they're young. And oh, hey, Lisa. So that one, it's kind of like herbal dog days of summer kind of thing. So I'm going to guess it's similar to the class that was going to go on tonight, that they were really looking at. It's like, what can we do with herbs to make this survivable? But also, I think, August and September, it seems like it is an eternity. And for the kids, they're going to be going back to school. Our next open forum, August 25th, August 26th and 27th. We're going to be having a flower essence certification series. So you can certainly just take one of them, but it's a 4-day or 2-weekend series. That one is not going to be offered online. That one's in person only. I'm super excited about that, although I probably won't be there for all of it. I may sit through some of it again as well. I helped teach that in the past, but we all need our brains reminded. Then our Ayurvedic series, we took a little break there for a month, is August 31st. And it's going to be an interesting one. It's great kind of exploring some different aspects of it. And so it will be making collages, but from an Ayurvedic standpoint. I think she's going to be kind of looking at what do our personal doshas look like and stuff like that. So I'm really excited about some of the more interesting explorations she's doing to make, Ayurvedic medicine is as complex as Chinese medicine, and sometimes it can get a little confusing. That's going to be one of our questions. I'm going to make an attempt to answer some of the weirdness in that. And August 19th, at the moment it's planned, I'll be putting out more information about it, but I was just asked to be one of the speakers at a Holistic Detox Summit that's coming up. It's international. There's going to be some speakers from South Africa and some other interesting folks from around the country, around the world. They're still lining up, but that's August 19th, but from 9 to 5:30. I believe that's going to be free. You just have to register for that. Hopefully in the next 2 or 3 weeks. Actually, it better not be in 3 weeks. And the thing is that it'll be in the next week or so. We'll be putting out more information, so be sure to follow us on all the various stuff. That's August 19th. And newer thing, we just decided to put a series on Tricia, who's the director, keeps everything running at the school for us, is going to be a 3-evening series on thyroid. And she's done similar things before. She's going to break it down into more usable, digestible sound bites. You can sign up for just one that's particularly interest, or sign up for all 3, which obviously I recommend. But it'll be a deep dive in what does that look like, what can we do, diet, lifestyle, herbs, and so forth, and look into a little of the anatomy, physiology, pathology of that. But it'll be nice because there's homework and stuff like that that goes with it. And so I plan to catch it because I can always learn some more thyroid stuff. Oh, and then there's the exciting announcement. I forgot about these things. go figure. I now have a podcast. So I started Mastering Herbalism with Bob Linde of the School of Herbal Studies, and you can find it on all the various Spotify and RSS and YouTube, you name it. Hopefully, whatever platform you use, if you go to your podcast, you should be able to find it. I do have it uploaded to our YouTube channel, but all of the channels, whatever works best for you. Last month, I did a series on about an hour or so on herbal safety, everything from some basic herb-drug interaction information, similar to what we covered here, but a little bit more depth, quality control issues, where we source our information, as well as, I don't know, how do you find an herbalist? I don't even know what that is. So some of the questions that over the last year or two we've answered on here, but consolidated into that. And then the next one we just recorded, it's getting, all mixed and prettied up and stuff, will actually be an hour interview with Trisha, talking specifically about thyroid. And first time I'm usually the interviewee. I've never really been the interviewer, and I thought it was just great. Did it all in one take. And I'm really excited about that. Next month, I haven't set the date to record and get it to launch, but I'm going to be spending about an hour talking about herbal and alternative approaches to cancer care. I know I get asked so many questions. I see so many online. I'm going to do kind of a do's and don'ts and some of the safety and look at that a little bit and spend an hour talking to myself. I'll interview myself on that one. So if you're just joining us, please let us know who you are, post a question. I will do my very best to catch up because we already got a good crowd in here, and I've got a pretty busy, all right, I don't need that piece of paper. I need that piece of paper. All right. Well, some of you, if you don't know it, I'm a big advocate of the American Herbalist Guild, and I didn't mention that. Their conference is coming up. And I should say this. July 31st is the deadline. You need to be registered for the conference. Before then, if you want the early bird special. They also recently posted out to, I think all their members at least, that if anybody's interested in work study and things like that, they always have opportunities for work study. They really want people to participate in their conference. It's out in Colorado this year. Is it October? I think it's in October. I'm not speaking this year, but it'll be a blast. Yes, please. Yeah, I think, ideally I get paid for this stuff occasionally. So, got to have lots of people signed up for the podcast to make it look like people actually listen to it so I can make $1 off of it or something. So right now there's no advertisers. It's just me. Also, if you don't know it, the school's got a YouTube page, Tradition School of Herbal Studies. You can find it on YouTube. Please subscribe to that sucker as well. I've got a bunch of things in the queue to launch that are available for everybody. And probably this Sunday, if I'm feeling really, really motivated, I'm going to go out and do a bunch of short videos, like 3 to 5 minutes, on some of our native plants here. I'll be bebopping around. I assume I'll go to Boyd Hill unless I get bored and just stay in my backyard. And talking about that a little bit. Okay, now let's get to the good stuff. Malaria, let's just start at that because it's at the top of my list. Just email the school, Lisa, and she'll email it out to you either first thing in the morning, and it may already be attached to an email that went out when you registered. But yeah, she'll get that to you out to you first thing in the morning if you email her, because I will totally forget in 2 hours that you said that. So malaria, if you don't know it, yay, most of us are here in Florida, and I'm sure some of you are from around the country. But we're seeing an expansion of the areas where we see malaria. So Sarasota, just 45 minutes south of us, are the first, I think we're up to 8 cases confirmed of malaria that is from Sarasota. And a lot of times we've seen malaria in the past where somebody came from, let's say, South America. They happen to catch malaria as they're getting on the airplane, and they show up here in a hospital with malaria. In this case, it is confirmed that they all came from here. We have, the last I heard, there was 2 in Texas. That was about a month ago. And as we see global warming, that expansion going on, that means mosquitoes that were very rare in the last 50 to 100 years in places like, and if you think it's just a subtropical Florida thing, malaria used to go all the way up to Washington, D.C., along with yellow fever, dengue, lots of other interesting mosquito-borne diseases. And it's been through the efforts of the Corps of Engineers and so forth that we've made this area, in the southeast overall, much safer, where those mosquito-borne diseases are much rarer. That may shift in a very short period of time. We went from, an occasional case every couple of years here in Florida, usually like the Keys or Miami. Now all of a sudden we're seeing 8. And look, now there's a mosquito flying around me. Now I'm paranoid. He's trying to stop me from getting the information out. So if you don't know it, malaria is literally kills nearly 1 million people every year. Half the population of the planet is at risk of malaria. And there are literally millions of cases every year. The very young, the very old, the folks with chronic immune compromised issues are at greatest risk of death from it. So it's scary stuff. And luckily, a number of years ago, a woman won the Nobel Peace Prize in medicine. I don't think she actually has a doctorate, but I certainly want to call her Dr. Tu Yu from China, was doing research on herbs. Imagine that, from the Chinese Medica. And I will, oops, yes, I can type it in there. I'm going to type it in here because half of you will have no idea what I'm about to say. Qing Hao is a very common Chinese herb. It's also Western herb. This is sweet Annie. Artemisia annua, and I will say other artemisias have some of the chemicals in there, but originally her research, she isolated a chemical called artemisin that was found to be 99% effective for the treatment of malaria, and the World Health Organization bought a gazillion doses of it, spread it throughout Africa, where 95% of all malaria cases is in Africa, as well as the deaths. But it also exists in Southeast Asia and the Caribbean, South America, and so forth. We have other scary mosquito-borne diseases here. And the problem is now that it's been out on the market for a while, and it is considered I'm going to say it's a prescription drug, but you can buy supplements of artemisin as well. It's used for a variety of other things, other blood-borne diseases or insect-borne diseases, as well as I see a lot of functional medicine docs use it for cancer. There's some decent research to support that. They've recently, about 5 years ago, they saw the first cases of the malaria that were resistant, primarily in Asia, to artemisian. And the problem was some of the less than ethical folks started diluting this isolated alkaloid, and when you dilute the medicine, it can create resistance, and so that now exists. I'm sure if we haven't already discovered it in Africa and South America, I'm sure it was shortly there. And I'm going to give the short version of this, but I've had a number of people who come to me that either they choose not to do malaria medication or they're unable to. And one of the downsides of the preventative, it's only about 60-70% successful in preventing malaria. Like, you can take it and still get malaria. The biggest scary thing about some of the malaria medications and the more effective one, is it causes psychotic breaks. So you go off to some interesting third world country, and you're in a small village where you're at highest risk, and you're taking your meds appropriately, and you lose your mind. And so you end up getting arrested, put into a prison that's probably not very pretty, and they take away unnecessary meds like your malaria medications, and you wake up and you're going, how did I get here? So anytime somebody does choose to take malaria medications, I always encourage people, start taking it a few weeks before you go. So if you're going to have psychotic break, it's here in the United States before you get to some interesting country. I prefer that. I have, though, even though I said Qinghao, the Artemisia annua, is used for treatment and not for prevention. The herb itself, this whole herb that's full of multitude of alkaloids, thousands of chemicals, is what is more classically used. So I've had the pleasure of, informed consent with my clients, but they're like, yeah, I'm not doing it, so what have you got? And I've always offered them the Artemisia annua. And so far, and I don't remember how many people I've given it to, in the 20s at least, no one's gotten malaria. To include, and this is always my favorite test case that I like to tell people, I had a large group that was going to do some relief work in, I believe they were in West Africa. I never remember whether it was East. Yeah, it was West Africa. Get my coasts confused there sometimes. And some of the people took the medication. Some of the people thought they were invincible and did nothing. And some of the people took my herbs. And because I don't remember the math, I'm going to say that 3 in each category. Of the people who chose to not do anything, every single one of them got malaria. Like, hands down, all had malaria. The ones who took the medication, 1 or 2 got malaria. And the folks who took the Sweet Annie, none of them got malaria. So right now I'm about in 1,000. I have not had a single person. I've had people on it up to 3 months. I think it's the longest I've had anybody on it. It is awfully bitter. It might get confiscated at the border of some countries, but so far that has not happened. But I always have people test it, and there are some contraindications. You wouldn't use it if you were pregnant. That goes back to one of the questions we're going to deal with here shortly. You couldn't do it if you had a compromised liver, and it might interfere with certain medications, to include anything from blood sugar. I don't think it would mess with birth control, but you never know. But it will change the processing time of medications through the liver. So there's definitely some contraindications for the Sweet Annie in a prevention kind of realm. But I will say that, as we start to see increasing prevalence of these mosquito-borne diseases, we're going to have to look to our natural products and our herbs, not our isolated chemicals, but our actual herbs, and its reference to that. And it's funny, I've seen, herbalists get to see the coolest stuff. So I've seen chronic malaria, which is not rare, but fairly rare to see that in the U.S. I've treated 2 cases of that now. I've had 1 case of chronic dengue fever. Those are the only ones I can think of. And it's crazy to think there's decent research out there to support things like our Spanish needle, the weed, the Biden's alba, that it's in everybody's yard. CETA has a little bit of research. Beautyberry, Calicarpa americana, has some decent research for some of the mosquito-borne diseases. So we're surrounded by medicine that may be helpful for that. And there's a dozen more that I won't even bother. But know that, even if, the scourge, blight, the plague of mosquitoes, whatever comes, we just need to improve both our research, but also going back and looking at the tradition, the set of symptoms that are commonly associated with any of these diseases, both in the acute and chronic phase. And the reality is, especially in the acute phase, no, go to the hospital. This junk will kill you, especially if you're dealing with autoimmune, if infants, compromised immune system kind of stuff. And that's not me just covering my butt. Although, I will say, none of this constitutes medical advice, and you should always consult somebody who has a license from the state, your herbalist, naturopath, MD, chiropractor, somebody else. Or, I always say, I'm quoting your grandmama, she'll approve of all of this, but ultimately, it is important. I'll once again, I've quoted this man too many times, David Winston, my herbalist man crush, always says, in his lifetime, he's really watched herbs become really popular. And unfortunately, he has not seen herbalists become popular. And we really need to make sure that we're going to the experts. It doesn't have to be me. There's lots of experts out there. And it's been nice, with the herb school. We have dozens of excellent herbalists in this community, and they're seeing clients. Some are doing it online, where I don't like doing it online. So I prefer seeing my people live and in person. There's people who specialize. Trisha specializes in thyroid disorders. So, finding the right herbalist for you that matches, both with what you suspect is your disorder or disharmony, with a system that you prefer, a type of herbs that you prefer. That's the nice thing, is there's so many different options as to how we approach it. And I'll add to that, not only is there different approaches, it's sometimes, I'm really good, I like to think I know stuff. But the reality is, for some reason, I may have an unrecognized bias. I may not be able to see the exact pattern that might be there, where somebody else who's lived that particular pattern spots it faster, and so just like it takes a village to raise a child, it takes a village of healers to solve the most complex problems. And so making sure that, get your blood work, see the MD, see the counselor, see the physical therapist and the physical trainer, and come see the crazy herbalist too. We're a part of that team of creating wellness. I'm gonna jump around a little bit. I got my list here of stuff. And if you're just joining us, feel free to post other stuff on here. I am sure this will keep us busy, but sometimes somebody says something really cool that I get excited about, and I'm like, ooh, you jumped up front of the line. We don't talk about puppy dogs and other various critters very often, so there was a question that's honestly pretty common with dogs. I haven't seen it very much in cats, but definitely a dog common issue. And with the hematomas with the ear, and I always say there's 1,000 different reasons why they get it. It can be dumb luck, the dog's out playing and runs into the rose bush. It can be, we all scratch our head and we scratch our ear. Well, dogs do the same thing, but more often, either fleas or some yeast or fungus is going in the ears. Ear mites are all very common causes for the dog to get some itching. And so they start doing this and they kind of don't stop. And that will frequently cause it either tears the ear, which is horrifying because that tends to bleed a lot. It will create that really large, raised, yucky purple hematoma. And it can be really painful for the dog. Also, for dogs with bigger, floppier ears, sometimes they'll start shaking their head when they've got the yeast fungus, ear mites, and things like that. And just shaking their head violently can sometimes cause a hematoma. And your treatments, if you're putting goop in their ears and so forth, all of that can really make them scratch and shake their heads and so forth. So the single most important thing always is treating the root cause. And so whether we're talking about dogs, cats, horses, or humans, doesn't really matter. We need to understand, how come that's happening. And some sort of infestation, and there's a slash there, as to why they're having an irritated, itchy ear. And a lot of times, if you're a critter person, you know what that stuff looks like. You're like, oh, look, you got ear mites. Thanks, neighbor. Other times, you're like, I don't know, take them to the vet. Let them do a little culture. And they can go, for us, our running joke, because we see dogs in the student clinic. And, oh, I forgot to promote that. But yay, we've got a school too. traditionsherbschool.com, clinical practice with a student clinic 3 nights a week. Call the clinic and sign up. But we'll sniff the dog ears and paws. Those are the most likely places. And it always sounds crazy. If you've ever had Fritos or some sort of corn chips, and I would say it's more of a Fritos smell than just, some regular corn chips for dipping in salsa. When that yeast gets bad and you stick your nose all up in there and sniff, you're not sure whether to gag or get the munchies, because it could go either way with the corn chip thing. So ascertaining that when it is a yeast or fungus in the ears, most likely it's the food. And even if you're getting the best food in town, dogs, when you're at work, they rehearse in front of the mirror, giving you that puppy dog look so that you give them snacks off your plate. it's you buy the most expensive food and you're giving them stuff that's really detrimental to them, or they're stealing it out of the trash. They always want the smelliest, grossest thing. And so making sure that we're controlling the food as best as possible, so that we're not getting those refined carbohydrates, same as humans. But it also could be from a round of antibiotics. It could be from food poisoning, long-term use of steroids. All of these are common things for dogs. And although you can use a fluconazole or some other kind of yeast fungus kind of thing, it tends to be a short-term solution. So we can give puppies probiotics and things like that. But ultimately, it always comes back to the food. The other thing, for things like mites and so forth, although we can certainly use herbs for that, I tend to look at some of the over-the-counter stuff. It's usually sufficient. Just clean the puppy dog's ears as best as possible. Fleas, the variety of ways to approach fleas, but they're a pain in the butt, especially here in Florida. Our summer times are brutal for dogs, and so I wish I had an easy answer, but everything from diatomaceous earth in their bedding, in the carpeting, flooring, and so forth, to sometimes you got to resort to some of the flea stuff, which is creepy and I'm not a fan of. But sometimes it's necessary here, especially if like you have neighbor dogs and things like that. The fleas are in the yard. I found it took 3 to 5 years to get my yard balanced out enough where it did not become a flea factory to my dog, and that's tough. Because you have to suffer for that first 3 years without spraying, without doing anything, to get a biome that's balanced that keeps them to a minimum. So that's a long time to suffer. So herbs, certainly topically, any of the same things that, think about the things we would use for a bruise for ourselves. For that hematoma, it would be the same. With the ears, it's nice. So we have to be careful. If a dog has a hot spot or something on their forepaws or back legs or on their belly, we have to be very cautious of what we put on those spots because they're going to lick it off. So whatever we put on them has to be okay for them to ingest. But the ears, they can't get at those. So maybe another dog will lick their ear. I've never seen, actually I have seen that. But generally we're not going to have to worry about the toxicity to dogs in particular for ears. And so the same things we would use for a bad contusion for a human. And as long as it's a closed wound, we could use a little bit of comfrey. We can use calendula, yarrow, if we're using Chinese herbs. We can use something like tianqi. I always got to remember, I got to spell the cool Chinese stuff. Also, AKA sanqi, depending on who you read, is a great topical. Honestly, just direct pressure can be super helpful. What other things do I like for that? Those are honestly, I would keep it super simple. Like there's a variety of other things we can use, but you could do it as a poultice, which is certainly hard to keep on a dog. They're not going to like it. So you could do either a straight oil infusion and apply that, I would say, multiple times a day, or you could do a salve and it gets a little easier. It'll stay on there a little bit better. Internally, we have to be a little bit more cautious. That cats are not baby humans. Not to say dogs are, but they kind of are. We adjust based on weight on puppy dogs, and most of the herbs that we can ingest, they can, not all. The calendula would be appropriate. I don't use comfrey internally on humans, so I certainly would not do it on a dog. Their processing is going to be a little bit different. What else do I like? I might do something like alfalfa for a dog, because the other thing, and sorry, I didn't actually think about this. I just read it a few minutes ago. The other thing that's important while we're thinking about this is the dog's easy bruising, and even though that can be pretty brutal, that scratching the ears, The reality is now all I see is mosquitoes circling me. They're literally they're sentient beings that have now ganged up on me because I'm spreading the information on how to kill them all. Sorry, it's a conspiracy. Um, the If the dog's bruising easily, that may be a problem uh, with their clotting. And so, um, with humans, I talk about vitamin C. Dogs do not need vitamin C. They produce their own vitamin C very differently. And so, too much vitamin C is actually very dangerous for dogs. And and you know what I forgot to mention? I can't believe I forgot to mention plantain. Literally my favorite herb for that. So a little plantain calendula that could be applied for that torn tip and so forth. But internally, it's very likely that there's some easy bruising going on. There may be some inflammation going on with the dog. So really kind of like, where's the problem? And it goes back to the food. But the alfalfa, very high in vitamin K, and can be really beneficial. Um, but yeah, the plantain, there's so many ways to work with plantain. And yes, with dogs, it's a pain in the butt to apply stuff. But if you get a little bit, yeah, it's one of the things, like, dogs don't know you're doing acupressure on them. They don't know they're getting worked on. And if you like put them in a headlock and grab some smelly salve and you start trying to rub it on their head and hold them still, they're going to fight. If we take a little bit of the salve, and I would actually keep the essential oils very low or out of a salve, just because dogs don't like, their sniffers a billion times stronger than ours. So I'll take a little salve and put it on my arm, and then I'll bring the dog over and start playing with the dog and just petting the dog. And then I'll get a little bit of salve on my fingers when he doesn't know I'm doing it, and start to massage that into the ears. And so a really good, strong, and you could do something like if you have fresh plantain. Some of you are up north. Oh, actually, Tammy, you're up north. You probably have fields of it. Juice some of the plantain, and then take that fresh juiced plantain and start smacking on some, if there's like a torn ear. I know that wasn't Tammy who just asked what if it's cut, but plantain is my go-to for non-healing wounds. You can add with it, especially if it's been a long time that it hasn't been healed. You can add things like astragalus and Angelica donguai, and I really like adding frankincense to it. And so not the essential oil, literally just grinding up from frankincense and putting it in there. On dogs, I don't use liniments as a general rule, just because the alcohol burns and they don't understand that, like, no, it's good, it cauterizes. They don't like it, and dogs generally don't need extra booze. So I tend to keep it really simple with them, and looking at things like, for a dog that's got bad flea outbreaks or having a response to some sort of responding to an irritant. And so if we give you or the dog or whoever prednisone, it suppresses the immune system so it doesn't respond appropriately to whatever this inflammatory thing is. But that reduces every part of your immune system, and so it makes you at greater risk of illness, cancers, and all kinds of creepy things. The other thing it does is it slows part of your immune responses. If I get a cut, my immune system goes, ooh, injury, and it sends all kinds of interesting parts of our extensive white blood cell system to fight any bacteria, because this is my barrier here. Same on a doggy's ear, there's a little barrier there. But it also sends in all of these different macrophages and all this other cool stuff that stops the bleeding, starts to repair and heal. So if I'm repressing the immune system, wounds don't heal properly. It drives me nuts when I see somebody post-surgically being given prednisone, because that almost guarantees they won't heal properly, and that increases the risk of infections and so forth. So in case you can't tell, I know there's a time and a place for things like prednisone or immunosuppressants, but I'm not a big fan. And we can usually get those things healed up, even in a case like that, with that plantain and some other cool stuff. All right. Doggy stuff. I'm trying to hit at least one question that everybody had, so pardon me while I bounce around a little bit. Oh, there was, man, okay, that was doggy hematomas. I'm going to babble quite a bit about, and I wrote notes because there was so much I had to say. I was like, I'm going to forget something. Of course, I don't see my notes. Oh well, I remember most of it. Oh, there it is. So glutathione, and it's really funny. It's fascinating having been in this realm, and it always sounds ridiculous. I was looking at nutraceuticals when I was 12, 14 years old. So I won't say how long I've been in this realm, but a really long time. And I watch these trends that go on, and reading historically, like castor oil cures everything, Linus Pauling, vitamin C cures everything. Back in the mid 90s, MSM, the sulfur cures everything. Right now, there's two fads that are going on right now. There's many, but just check TikTok. Glutathione is one of them, and glutathione's really good stuff. But the other one is copper. And so obviously somebody somewhere, and I keep saying this, I haven't looked it up yet, I need to. But somebody somewhere did a little bit of research. Oh, you know what? Shoot, I didn't write one of these down. What the heck was that plant? Somebody had asked me about it for Alzheimer's, and I'm embarrassed to say I don't think I wrote it down. Somebody probably did some research that said, ooh, if you don't have enough copper, you can't absorb iron. And that may be true, but now if everybody goes out and gets copper, there is copper toxicity. And I think, and somebody, Michael, I don't know if you're on here, but you might have been the one who said, I don't know, somebody recently said it, and I was like, ooh, that's a really good idea. That during COVID, we heard a lot about zinc and how protective, antiviral, boosting immune system. So people were taking massive amounts of zinc. And zinc's great, especially if you're deficient in zinc. But the reality is zinc needs to be paired with copper at around a 15 to 1, 15 parts of zinc to 1 part copper, give or take. If it's in the ballpark, if it's 10 to 1, great. If it's 16 to 1, nobody cares. But somewhere in that 15 to 1 ratio. So all these people were probably doing 50 to 100 milligrams of zinc and did not know about the importance of copper. So we probably had a lot of folks who kind of threw that out of whack. And so I would be cautious with just cranking it up. And some communities have more copper in their water. It's from their pipes, which is not a good source of copper, but it's still there. That probably are not dealing with a copper deficiency. So somebody, if somebody knows where that initial research is, please do. It's so, yes, thank you, hydrangea. I was like, oh my God. I could picture it. I was like, what's your name? Thank you. I'm going to talk about that one next, just cause. But I didn't finish glutathione. So glutathione is a naturally occurring product in our body. It has a bunch of amino acids and so forth that are building blocks. It's honestly in every cell and most of our functions in our body. It helps to build our DNA. It's part of the methylation cycle, I believe. It's in the mitochondria. It is antioxidant, which I hate that word. Iceberg lettuce is an antioxidant too. But we see that it's a little bit more direct in that reducing oxidation, which is rust, which we call inflammation. That we see that it has a role in improving insulin sensitivity. And so the opposite of that, we talk about insulin resistance. So people who are dealing with borderline blood sugar issues or actually type 2 diabetes, this kind of makes the cells more responsive to the sugar that we're bringing in, the insulin. Sorry, I gotta write down something. Yeah, close enough. I'll remember it from there. It's also very specific for tissue healing and wound healing, and there's some decent research about its use for ulcerative colitis. It has a role in our immune system, in sperm cell creation. So, as we see decreasing sperm counts in men, Infertility is a growing issue in our society here. It usually blames the women, but what we're finding out is the sperm counts, sperm motility, the health of the sperm, in case people forget we're half the equation in this, has decreased immensely in the last 30 years or so. And so making sure that we have as healthy a sperm as we can. Glutathione has a role in that. Oddly enough, there's a decent bit of research. A lot of people, it's funny, I was just talking about mercury and detoxification for the summit that's coming up next month. And it has a specific role in removing mercury from your brain, which generally a place I don't mind them in my teeth. I don't want it in my brain. So a lot of people are going through chelation and things like that for mercury, ensuring that they have adequate and ideally excellent amounts of glutathione. It has a role, and so it has a role in cancer stuff, and I'm purposely saying it that way. It is not a cure for cancer, but it has a role in ensuring programmed cell death, what's called apoptosis. And so people who are lower in glutathione, cells don't quite function right. The mitochondria isn't getting the signal to off itself. So it does have some role in that. What else can I say about it? Blah, blah, blah. Cancer, I said ulcerative colitis. Parkinson's, it's not a cure for Parkinson's, but it does seem to have an impact in slowing it as well as reducing some of the symptoms of it. It's also protective to the liver and liver cells. So for somebody who's compromising their liver either through exposure to a lot of chemicals, it's frequently being added into chemotherapy in more progressive places because chemo does challenge the liver. Somebody's dealing with drug or alcohol abuse where their liver is a little bit more challenged, it can be super helpful for them to continue long-term use of that. And there's some interesting, hearing the thunder out there now. It's not a cure for autism, but it has a role in autism. It's one of those things where autism being researched a lot, has been for a long time, and so they're always looking for the nutritional deficiencies in kids with autism because they have a lot of inflammatory gut stuff going on, food sensitivities, and so forth. And so things that they find are generally helpful is the essential fatty acids, glutathione, vitamin D, and B complex. And so I always like all the Bs, not just the B12 that people talk about. Things that can be helpful, and and there's eye stuff, basically all of our anti-aging stuff. I already did that. Making sure there was a second least. There we go. So things that are kind of value added, if you're going, I got to do glutathione, which I do glutathione. I actually like glutathione. I started doing it more about 6 months or so ago. I was actually researching this, and so the person who asked this was just starting to research it. It works better with NAC, which is N-acetylcysteine, and also SOD can be kind of like multipliers, especially if you're doing the oral glutathione, which I'll talk about that in a second. SOD is the superoxide oh my God, I never say that one. Dismutase. There we go. Close enough for government work. So helpful to do that. Milk thistle can also be helpful as kind of a multiplier. But the reality is we're not supposed to need to take freaky ass supplements when we do this. So if you're like, well, I think I'm good, but I want to make sure that my glutathione levels stay healthy, eat your sulfur-rich foods. I mentioned MSM a while back and how that was helping with our immune system and cell death. Basically, everything I just said, they found that MSM, which is the methyl sulfide something or another, itchy nose, that was helping all the things I just said. The glutathione is a little bit more direct. So your sulfur-rich foods are things like all of your onions and garlic, things that make you sweat and smell funny. Mushrooms, interestingly enough, are very high in sulfur compounds. Broccoli, kale. For those of you in Tampa, because I haven't found it here yet, is the what I call fart vine, which is called stink vine, and I totally don't remember the Latin name. It's an invasive here in Florida that is phenomenal medicine, but it literally, because of the high sulfur content, it smells farty. It's really fun to like roll it up and throw it under somebody and who cut the cheese kind of thing. The one of the reasons we see probably glutathione deficiency in a lot of people and sulfur deficiency in a lot of people is because the second we pull food out of the ground, and vegetable of your choice, we pull it out of the ground, the sulfur compounds in there start to break down. So the further it is from farm to table, the less sulfur content is in there. So if we have all of these chemicals that slow the browning or the rotting of things, but the sulfur is still breaking down. So finding your local foods, growing your own foods. It's hard to grow some vegetables, but every little bit of stuff that you get fresh, that you get from places like Sweetwater Farms and so many of the local organic farms that we have here. Going to Saturday morning market to get your fresh produce that was just picked in the last 24 hours is going to have higher sulfur contents and work on boosting the glutathione. And there's a lot of debate whether exercise helps it or not. I would say it reduces inflammation, so we don't need as much glutathione if we're eating just a healthier meal, reducing our inflammatory foods and so forth. Well, one of the big questions that always comes up, and there's no 100%, but there's huge arguments about taking an oral pill or a spray or something like that versus injections, and that can be an intramuscular, just in the arm or in the butt, versus IV. And the reality is most of our digestion is a little jacked. I've said that a million times in 1,000 different forms. And so there may be a challenge in absorbing certainly a pill. Certainly better in an oral spray, and I will say I do the oral spray that we've got at the clinic. I do that on almost every day since I kind of did my homework on glutathione a little bit more depth. But the better, more guaranteed is injections, and again, it can be IV or intramuscular. It really doesn't matter. And it's always funny, and I don't do injections. As an acupuncturist, I can spend $1,000 and take the course. Instead, I've got awesome acupuncturists there in the clinic that, since I was licensed way the hell long ago, it wasn't in my scope of practice back then. Since they went to school, it's actually a requirement now for their graduation. So I'm like, let them do it. I will. It's funny. I think the last time I got a glutathione shot was the day before Herb Day, first Saturday in May, and it was amazing. It felt great. I think I mixed it with a B12, and it was my first time getting it as an injection. And I was like, they do it in the butt because it's one that we can't do in acupuncture points. You could, but it would be painful. So got it in the butt, and I was like, all right. And I'm super sensitive, so I was like, it wasn't just shock. My eyes opened up a little bit, and there's a lot of work and energy and stress that goes into Herb Day, as much as I love it. And I think I got 4 hours of sleep that night. Part of it was the excitement of Herb Day, but at the end of that, I really wasn't that tired. I was fired up on my couple of hours of sleep. It was so energizing, and not like too much coffee energizing, just like strong, focused, eyes open, better vision, blah, blah, blah. So I periodically go, I need to go and get another one of those glutathione shots. I probably should do it every month. Even though, I like to think I eat pretty good, I know I could eat better than I do, and I could eat more fresh vegetables as much as I yell at everybody else for it. All right. Well, since I forgot all about the hydrangea, I do have much to say about the hydrangea. one of the students sent me an article about some new research that just came out on hydrangea and Alzheimer's. And it was an interesting area of research. And what they were there before that's causing a dysfunction of the brain. So, and it's making our memory clouded, if you will. And so, if I go home tonight and order some pizza and beer, I won't have a clear mind tomorrow. So I'll have a little bit of phlegm from some really yummy food, but I'll pay the price, and I won't be able to think clearly. If you've ever had a sinus infection, you know what too much phlegm in the brain it feels like. And so that plaque is some sort of hard phlegm that is causing a dysfunction in the brain. And so hydrangea is for phlegm. We even use it for certain types of hard phlegm because we use it for kidney stones sometimes, or kidney dysfunction with anything from frequent urination or urinary incontinence to just like stones in the kidney, stones in the bladder, things like that. So in Chinese medicine, so again, switching systems and taking. So prostate is one of the few things that women don't have to worry about. I shouldn't say that. They sort of, in a long roundabout way, do. Prostate is specific only in men, and although we see that it gets enlarged, benign prostate hyperplasia is just an enlargement of the prostate. It can happen at any age, but is more common as we age, and it will get not even inflamed. It will get engorged with phlegm, if you will, and it causes dribbles. And so the incomplete urine stream, where guys maybe used to like pride themselves on writing their name in the snow, now they're like back going to the bathroom multiple times. That there's stains in their underwear, and that's usually from an enlarged prostate. And it is caused by an increase in the dihydrotestosterone, what I always refer to as just used up testosterone. DHT is way easier to say. Hey, Natalie. The reality is there are many herbs, and ultimately diet and lifestyle has an impact on the prostate. But some of the same approaches, because if we recognized why the prostate gets enlarged, the DHT, the used up testosterone, because there's free testosterone, there's not free testosterone. This can be, men and women both have testosterone, estrogen, progesterone. We share luteinizing hormone. We share follicle stimulating hormone. They just have slightly different functions in the body, and the amounts are slightly different. So for women, this is also important. So we would use all the same prostate herbs for a woman with elevated testosterone, in particular, that is very, very common, almost expected to be seen with women with PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome. So they'll frequently get the hair thinning, the facial hair, more of, we have chest hair. All of that is a sign of elevated testosterone levels. We can help with that clearance of the DHT, the used up testosterone, and really help alleviate some of those symptoms. So the go-to one that probably has the greatest research is saw palmetto. The problem with saw palmetto is there's some major quality control issues with saw palmetto. It is a Florida native. It grows everywhere in Florida, into Georgia. I'm not sure if it goes up past that or not, but Florida is the famous harvesting place. I believe it's in Texas as well. It needs to be picked at its, just when it goes from green, starting to get some black on it. It has to be broken out of the shell. It is a fruit or a nut, if you will. And it's funny, not funny. I just had a student say, "Oh, you got to taste my tincture of saw palmetto," and I was like, "It tastes too good. Did you add some?" She's like, "No, I just did it. Did a really good ratio and did everything right." And so we're looking for the nut that's inside the shell. So we have to break open that. And the most important part is that little nut on the inside. And it is nasty smelling and tasting. And so your tincture, your powder, your pill, whatever form you take your palmetto in, I have no better way to explain it than it tastes like rotten soap. And not that that has a flavor, but boy, it's like this is going bad, and it tastes like soap. So there's saponins in there, so that's soapy taste. So it is important that we process, that we get good quality. Unfortunately, Florida has recently passed some very strict harvesting rules. You need a permit to harvest saw palmetto, and not only like in public lands, but to harvest on your own property, you actually need a permit. And basically what they're doing is there's been so much poaching on public and private land of that. It's like, do whatever the heck I want on my property. I think if you make your own tincture for your own use, they don't really care, but they want to make sure that people are harvesting ethically and sustainably. And, hard to believe this is coming from Florida. But it is a Florida law. But I think what they're doing is trying to cut down. So if they're monitoring how much any one person on a particular property is allowed to harvest, it's harder for the poachers to sell that on the open herb market. So I think that's kind of the idea. And, if you're harvesting it yourself, you know exactly what the quality is. You know that it was harvested at that peak time just as they're starting to turn black. You know that the shells have been cracked open and it can be dried and encapsulated because it is nasty, tinctured, however you choose to do it. It's also important if you have an herbal product, whether it's straight saw palmetto or some of the other herbs, it should taste nasty. You need to be able to taste that rotten, soapy, saponiny flavor, whether it's in your tincture, you open up the capsule, you taste it. If you're like, oh, tastes all right, then it's not a good product. So often I hear people like, I are some other herbs that are helpful, but those are the big ones. There's pumpkin seeds and a few others that people talk about. But that's really the biggie with all of that. Blah, blah, blah. Herbs, ooh, that's a toughie. All right. How am I doing on time? I'm kicking butt. I'm actually going to make it through all of this. That's my list of all the things I wanted to say. There. Okay, I can scratch prostate off. We can check that off. I'm going to leave that if I got time because we've covered that in the past. I'm going to do pregnancy herbs in a second, but I want to talk about, and it was from one of our Chinese students. Yay, Chinese students, and they're not on here often enough, so they should be on here asking all kinds of crazy. There's my notes on that. But the language of Chinese medicine, and it gets really confusing for a lot of people. And it's so common, whether you're seeing an herbalist or an acupuncturist, if they're using Chinese medicine as their foundation for how they approach, the recommendations, their herbs and the classical formulas that they recommend for people, they're going to start saying things like liver qi stagnation and heart fire and all these other really bizarre things. And it's so common for somebody to go, what's wrong with my liver? Do I have a heart problem? Do I need to go see a cardiologist? And the reality is, nah, your ticker's probably fine, and your liver may or may not be great. And it's important to understand kind of this foundation. Where does Chinese medicine come from? And it was, for the last 5,000 or 10,000 years, an attempt to explain what people are seeing. And we're making translations from Chinese into English in the closest approximation as to what they're saying. And so sometimes the language changes based on who the translator is, and I'll talk about in a second is when the translation was. And that's where it gets to be a pain in the ass. So when we think about where did they get some of these ideas, it was primarily from farm animals. As they slaughtered farm animals for food, they were like, well, we know what this thing is, and we call it a liver, and this thing is a heart. And they used cool Chinese names that I'm not going to pretend to say. And so they equated certain ideas, behaviors, seasonal changes, all of these kinds of ideas with each one of these physical organs. And when we start to get into acupuncture, we see that those organs are connected by meridians or lines of energy that we relate back to that, and they have a correlation in paired organs, and then we access that through acupuncture points. That's too much information. And it's always interesting. You always wonder, it's like, why do they associate a season with an organ? And we find that there was a lot of astrology tied up with all of this. A lot of our ideas when we expand, kill animals, looking at how we can do that where we're not doing it in waste and so forth. And so in the time that I've known her, she's had to slaughter 2 cows or steers. I don't, 4-legged big things that go move. And I remember she talked about, because she did it in a different season. And it wasn't so much that whether it was grass-fed or whatever, these were free-rangy, grass-fed, but that not only was the meat different, the fat color was different, and the functionality and the flavor of the fats on this animal were different. And so I could see how through thousands of years of harvesting farm animals and seeing how the animal is different based on where it is in the season. And it may be at one season there's availability of one type of grain or grass, and another season it's that. But this is an observational science that we try to understand through appropriate translation of stuff. And so if you're like, what's good for my liver? And it says, Chinese medicine, you do this. That may not be your physical liver to affect liver enzymes. That may be to affect your eyes or your muscle contraction or your tendons. So we have all of these unique associations. But the question, wait, I wrote it down, was specifically about the language that's in some of the resources that are online, and it is sometimes mentioned in our textbooks that we use. And we tend to use Chen and Chen for our single herbs, our materia medica, and we tend to use Bensky for our formulas. And personal opinions, both of those authors have formula books and single herb medica books, but I feel that they're a little bit different. The Chen and Chen, and you can find those on the school's website. We've got them in our list of resources. We've got recommended books. There's all kinds of Western and Chinese cool stuff there. I find Chen and Chen is more concrete. He's like, this herb does that. Where Bensky is this beautiful synergy. This is the cool stuff. When these herbs are combined together, this magical thing happens. It's not quite that out there, but literally like how we can change the directionality, the fusion of these herbs is creating new actions. And I feel like that's really the beauty of formulation, that is preserved better in Chinese medicine than it is in most of the other systems, certainly better than in what's in the Western system. We don't have the 1,000-year-old formulas, and there are literally hundreds of those. There's, I think there's well over 40,000 formulas that are over 100 years old, and oftentimes going back 1,000 or more years. So 2 of the words that drives me nuts, and I always have to like hesitate and think, is replete and vacuity. And like, I feel like an old English professor in Oxford or something. When I am replete with mangoes. If you're not from around here, that's kind of like our summer squash and zucchinis. Right now, all the zucchinis are all of the mangoes are ready, and people are literally dumping them on people's doorsteps. So there is an excess or a more than sufficient amount of mangoes if I am replete with mangoes. And so to have more than enough qi, more than enough blood, is actually like, I am full of qi and blood. I have more than enough. I can even give some up. Vacuity, it is vacuous. There is a vacuum, that there is not enough of stuff to produce the healthy life that we want. So I don't have a good example because we're replete with mosquitoes, and hopefully there will be a vacuity of malaria cases in the near future. I don't know. There we go. It's as good as I'm getting today. And so think of replete as full, and vacuity as empty or deficient. And so replete usually isn't referring to an excessive amount, but a full and sufficient amount. Vacuity, though, is definitely a deficiency, empty amount of stuff. And then she also asked about scattering, and it was, oh my God, there's a comic from Germany who I think he talked about, he was trying to learn the slang terms in English and how he couldn't understand the most versatile word in the English language, and that was shit. And so that was bad shit or good shit. Both mean good. And, you know, like, so scatters chi is bad, scatters cold is good. So scatter just means moves with gusto. And so our chi is something we want to hold on to. So if I use too many diaphoretic herbs, if I started doing like really strong teas of elderflower and yarrow flowers and chamomile, and I was just doing like really strong cups 3 or 4 times a day, I'm hot flashing like nobody's business, sweat's pouring off, that's not actually good. That's actually going to weaken us over time. That's not preventative medicine. Just like I wouldn't take an antibiotic 5 times a day for 10 years trying to prevent a bacterial infection. All I would do is destroy myself. So if I invigorate the chi, if I disperse the chi with aromatic herbs, diaphoretic herbs, too much at the wrong time, I actually will make myself weaker. So that would be a bad choice. And if I have cold is considered an excess, it comes from outside, either from a cold environment with too much cold drinks, and it will set up camp. And we see that, you know, my favorite example for excess cold in the body is when a 6-year-old gets hold of a Slurpee from 7-Eleven and tries to guzzle it down really fast or eats ice cream really fast, and then they just vomit. And it's not that they're sick. The cold literally gets in there and their belly hurts because they drank something that was too cold. And so if we take ginger after they say they've got a bellyache from eating too much cold stuff, it will push out or scatter the cold, relieving their symptoms and making sure that that doesn't become a permanent issue. Hopefully that vaguely made sense. And it is challenging as you're reading that. I know when I was first learning this, these terms made me nuts. And I would literally have to like highlight it, then remind myself about replete and vacuity. Oh, and that comes from the primary translator prior to 1974, I believe it was. Giles was his name. I don't remember what his name was. He uses these stupid terms like replete and vacuity. Some people love it. And so you can almost tell who somebody's teacher was or when they learned if they use that terminology. Like Bob Flaws loves those words. I don't read a lot of Bob Flaws because he loves those words. So post 1974, most people use excess and deficient or sufficient amounts of chi and so forth. Yeah, the other terms make sense. Holy crap, I only got 30 minutes. All right. That's all I'm going to say about that. Yeah, because herbs for pregnancy might take me a minute. I think I'm caught up. Huh. You don't want to read my chicken scrap. We did that. Okay. Herbs for pregnancy. Holy crap, that's work. And I will say I spend the better part of an entire weekend to do a cursory overview of herbs and pregnancy and how we do it based on the trimester and so forth. Suffice it to say, there's 2 very strong encampments. Either, oh my God, don't do herbs, they're dangerous, they'll kill you, they'll cause 1,000 miscarriages and everything else. And other people are like, well, can I have pizza and some Italian seasonings while I'm pregnant? And most people would go, well, yeah. And there are many herbs that are classically indicated during pregnancy, and sometimes we will change that indication where you are, usually broken up into trimesters, first, second, third trimester. And there are some herbs that are clearly contraindicated, like something like blue cohosh, and I would argue even black cohosh, and depending on who you read, that would be contraindicated through the pregnancy, but are indicated during labor. And so really we have 4 categories generically of how and when we use herbs. And then we've got the other category of that is vast of what if we're having pregnancy or difficulties during our pregnancy, anything from hyperemesis, which is kind of like the nonstop pukiness. What if you're getting a lot of pain? What if you're starting to get some Braxton Hicks kind of cramping before your due date? What if you have repeated miscarriages or threatened miscarriages? And then I would argue all the stuff that we should be doing prior to getting pregnant, like a good prenatal vitamin and generally getting the body balanced out. So, holy crap, this is a big subject area, and I will generically say that to be taught properly, you probably need 6 months to a year of fairly intense study. There are great books out there, and teachers for somebody who wants to specialize in this. It's funny. It seems like there's more women herbalists than men, and it's one of the few things for that. Usually it's very male-dominated professions. I think the only other one is massage therapy. It's harder for a man to make a living as a massage therapist because the women, appropriately so, are fearful of getting groped, and the men don't like to see male massage therapists because they're homophobic, and that's a sad statement, but dude has to be super talented to even make a minimal living at that. So in the realm of herbalism, a lot of people focus on women's health in general, but even within that, if we're looking at women's health, it is a subspecialty, I would argue, to focus in on pregnancy. And without a doubt, almost scarier challenges, because you screw up, you can cause some harm. There's herbs like comfrey, even though a very controversial herb, can we do it internally or not? I think there's a general agreement around folks who are reading the research that, don't do it if you're pregnant though. And don't give it to infants, that we're more likely to cause harm whilst that kid is in utero, in development, and so forth. There are a number of other herbs like that as well. I would say not enough herbalists out there focusing on postpartum, like following up after the mom's had a kid to ensure adequate breast milk, to make sure that we're talking about infant care. They pick it up great at about 8, 10, 12 years old, but how about those first 2 years of life, helping people through that whole process? I would love to see some doulas starting to become herbalists to look at that pregnancy, birth, but then really paying attention to that year or two postpartum for supporting the moms. I think too often that 2-year window of baby mama care and dad care, they don't sleep much either, I'm guessing. I don't have any regrets of my own. I think that's too often a neglected area in the alternative wellness for moms and babies. And I'm always happy, I've helped with a lot of folks getting pregnant. I've helped with lots of people through their pregnancies. And I actually enjoy doing herbal care with the little kids, the infants in particular, because you can put them in a headlock and just force feed. No, I'm just kidding. My youngest I've worked on so far was 7 days old. I was really excited. I had helped mom through the pregnancy and all of that. So that was my big exciting one. All right, back on task, Bob. You can tell I haven't had dinner because I get a little loopy and off topic. So the biggie ones that are frequently recommended during pregnancy is red raspberry, oats, nettles, and alfalfa are probably the ones that are like, you're good, and yet you will find contraindications for nettles during pregnancy. And that's from stupid people. No, I didn't say that, did I? No, most midwives, most folks who are actually trained in any kind of basic herbal care, nettles is very nutritious, very safe, and indicated for pregnancy. There is some very poor data that is not repeatable that suggests that the root is not indicated because it is affecting hormones. Because remember, nettle root was one of those herbs we used for the prostate to help with the clearance of DHT. And testosterone is one of those. Some people leave it out in the first trimester out of general paranoia, because if you look at the isolated compounds in the alfalfa, you can see that there's a compound in there that may have a role in bleeding, and they forget that it's backed up by vitamin K, which stops bleeding. So I personally think alfalfa is fine. It is extremely mineral rich. It improves digestion. It's nutrient dense and has a range of balanced nutrients in it. But some people will purposely avoid it. It's generally thought that you should add it in at around no later. It doesn't hurt anything after 34 weeks, but it is best utilized prior to 34 weeks because of the vitamin K content that if we do it that soon will be imbued, for lack of a better word, to the baby and provide benefits during delivery for that. Most of your mints are generally considered safe during pregnancy. And I know everybody's like, first trimester, looking at, nausea, vomiting is, I'm not going to say normal, but it is a common thing to see during that first trimester. Basically, your body adjusting, hormones, blah, blah, blah. My number one recommendation, because that can get serious and dangerous, like when people it's not like, oh, I have morning sickness, oops. When they're like hyperemesis, where they're vomiting nonstop and oftentimes past the first trimester, hyperemesis can become dangerous, where you're dehydrated, that you need IV fluids. That becomes dangerous and oftentimes can result in miscarriage and at least an underweight or early term delivery of the baby, which we want to try to avoid, so the baby gets as much chi as we can from mom. So everybody goes, take ginger, it's good for nausea and vomiting, and it is. The best prevention is keeping food in the belly so that there are snacks, and I don't care, yes, make it as healthy as you can, but I really don't care what the hell you eat. If you just need to survive your first trimester, put snacks by the side of the bed. The second you wake up, every 2 hours, you should be putting something in your pie hole. A, you're eating for two now, but B, if you keep food in your stomach 95% of the time, that will be sufficient to minimize or prevent the morning sickness. If you're able to do that and get ahead of it, that's usually a win. There are times, though, where it ain't enough. Ginger works great as an herb. It is indicated for pregnancy, but not if they have a red tongue. So ginger is very hot energetically, and so if this person, their constitution runs hot, and they have a red tongue, rapid pulse, red face, anything like that, ginger will piss them off and cause nausea. And every time I say this in the gyno OB class, everybody's like, that was me, they were trying to kill me, giving me ginger. So in this case, when you have somebody who has a red tongue, use catnip. It is also for nausea, but is cooling. And so really, for those of you who are familiar with energetics, this can make a dramatic difference. and it really needs to be a ginger tea, ideal, or a tea form that works better, that's getting more fluids in their body, which they need. I don't recommend tinctures. I try to keep it as simple as possible. Fresh ginger tends to work better than dried ginger. It's also not as hot as dried ginger. It's better than ginger ale or ginger cookies. I know people recommend all those things, and I'm like, yeah, whatever. It's probably the actual cookie that's helping more than the ginger in it. Other things that slippery elm, a lot of times acid reflux, especially the last trimester. You now got a big old baby that is pushing on all of your organs. And so frequently that includes pushing your stomach up and causing hiatal hernia, where the top of your stomach is protruding through your diaphragm. So acid reflux is kind of normal that last trimester. So marshmallow, slippery elm is really helpful for dealing with that. I also recommend that after you give birth, it is always a good idea to see a chiropractor that specializes in that, and there are many that work on babies as well as moms after that. So finding somebody who specializes in it, but also it's good to have a baby get an adjustment from a chiropractor who's specialized. I wouldn't go to just any old good chiropractor. I would go to someone anything too cold during pregnancy. I've gotten very conflicting points on that. I don't sweat shatavari, but I would probably not use it in the first trimester. I would be less. Shatavari is also, I'm going to say the crazy Chinese word, tianmendong. It's asparagus root. And so if you're allowed to eat asparagus, you can probably get away with using shatavari. But shatavari is used for fertility to get pregnant, but a lot of the things that get us pregnant is then contraindicated during pregnancy. Ashwagandha is another one where you'll get very different reports there, and part of it sometimes is different parts of the plant. With ashwagandha, the seeds are used more for preventing pregnancy. The roots are used to get you pregnant. But then I think, if I remember right, not recommended during pregnancy. A lot of times this also comes down to dosage and frequency with all of these things. Let me talk about the things that are like generally discouraged during pregnancy. And again, it always comes down to dosage, what's the pattern, and so forth. Toxic herbs, don't do those during pregnancy. And so you're not going to use poke root. You're not going to use comfrey. You're not going to use, futza, aconite. So avoid things that are known poison, because whatever you're putting in your body, even though I hit my throat spray, it's got poke and all kinds of poisonous in it. I'm an adult. I'm doing minute amounts. It's my body can handle a little bit. If ever in your life you drank alcohol, you just drank poison. Literally, we sterilize our skin before we break it by putting alcohol on the skin to kill all living things. It's antiseptic, and yet people drink alcohol every day, and they live okay. But a fetus, because now we're talking a little inchworm in there. Their organs are not developed, their kidneys and livers and so forth are not designed to handle toxins. And so anything that has a potential negative effect on liver and kidney functions, we want to try to avoid. It's why we don't recommend drinking alcohol while you're pregnant, because no, then you end up with fetal alcohol syndrome, and we end up with babies that have some problems later on in life. So I would avoid any herb that is a known toxic to make you poop a lot. Well, sometimes your body just goes, let's push lots of lumpy things downward, and that would include a fetus. So we really want to minimize, or I would say exclude, anything that is purging downward. Things that are highly hormonally active. And we have things like we use Vitex to affect progesterone levels. We use Angelica Dongguai to affect estrogen levels. Does that mean you should never do them? You can do them, but we got to do your homework on that and see what tradition and what research says and use them very cautiously. There are, we said, okay, downward purgy, things that are really drying, we need to be careful of. So when we look at, the baby's in there, and that baby has a fluid-filled sac, and the umbilical cord, all of this, everything has to be in a very wet, watery environment. And so in the same way, mom, we don't want her to get dehydrated because that can be dangerous for everyone involved. But if we have herbs that are highly diuretic, very drying, and different from toning, there's I'm trying to think of a good example of a drying herb versus a toning herb, because red raspberry is toning. Oak, that's more toning too. That's just, I can't think of a good one. Because the one I'm trying to think of is Chinese Pinellia bansha, is drying and toxic, and yet we sometimes use it during pregnancy when it's indicated. So go figure. That's a horrible example. I don't know. I can't think of one right off the top of my head. So overly drying, and it doesn't mean we can't do it. We just don't want to do it a lot. We don't want to do things that are in the extreme. Anything too cold or too hot. Aconite's the only one I can think of that's too hot. Coleus focolsi is Ayurvedic herb, is probably too hot. Panarnava, I don't know off the top of my head if it's contraindicated for pregnancy, but I know that's a very hot herb. And some of you are going to go about, what about cayenne pepper? Can I have a hot curry? And this is where it gets interesting. You can do hot peppers during pregnancy. I might minimize it during first trimester. It might aggravate your acid reflux in the last trimester, but traditional cultures, Central South America, equatorial countries, they eat the hell out of some peppers, and not the gentle green peppers either. And there's plenty of those kids. So as much as past recommendations have been to avoid anything spicy, we don't always list those things as hot, oddly. So we've got to be selective in what we say is good or bad. And we say it in very generalized terms, but the list is endless. Ooh, I didn't bring that out. It's important to go to the specialty books. Viva Rom, I like. The Herb Drug Interactions book, I think, has some decent research in there and allows you to kind of make your own choices. Chirona Low Dog is great. It's the only ones I can think of off my top of my head. In the Chinese herbal realm, we have specific books that are focused both modern and ancient research. So that's nice. The Chinese kind of does it for us, which makes my life easier. I will say, when I'm working with a pregnant mom, I tend to, if everything's going along healthy, they just want support, I tend to use the Western herbs. And the red raspberry, oats, and nettle. That's like, here you go, every mom needs it. I'll put in a little bit of, and not a lot, I always do very light on things that, like holy basil I might toss in there, very gentle. And as long as they're happy and healthy and they go through their whole pregnancy, which most moms do, then I'm like, yeah, and I usually add the alfalfa in there in the second trimester, sometimes in the first, but usually in the second. And then towards the third trimester, I up my red raspberry and make that probably 2/3 of the formula and a little bit of the other stuff. I'll oftentimes increase the oats. I might add some other things in the last few weeks to ensure that there's ample breast milk if I'm concerned that they're not going to produce enough breast milk. Usually most people do fine. And that works wonders. But those aren't usually the folks who come to the herbalist or the acupuncturist. I'm more likely to see somebody, my classic example of, I've had 3 miscarriages, and if I have another one, I'm never going to try again. You have to make it successful this time. It's like, oh, great, thanks, no pressure. And usually, I'm going to say 80% of the time I'm successful. But that's partly the diet and lifestyle leading up to ensure that this person is strong and healthy, that they are replete with chi, that they have plenty of blood, that they have plenty of nutrients, that they're vibrant, that their hormones, because too often, I know the MDs, oh, you had a miscarriage. Well, as soon as you start your cycle, you can try to get pregnant again. And that's a lie. I usually encourage, I use something called black chicken, white phoenix, or other classical formulas to nourish the mom after a loss like that. We need to support them physically, energetically, and emotionally through that loss. And that's a whole nother, we'll do that next time if anybody asks. But I always encourage people to give me 6 months to build them up before they try again. They don't always listen to me, but whatever. The other things that happens is people will come to me, literally, if I'm lucky, I've seen them prior to it, but they're like, I think I'm about to miscarriage, what do I do? In which case, you treat what you see, and that sometimes involves informed consent with the client, with the mom, as well as doing things that may seem contrary, that we really have to do your homework, and I would say should be left to more experienced, well-trained herbalists, because that's emotionally terrifying for everyone, both for the practitioner. I can tell you I don't sleep well after I've done that. I pull out all the stops, and I mix the Western and Chinese, and I do some crazy ass stuff. But usually, I'm successful in preventing miscarriage. It's one of the scarier things. Like, that's up there with cancer for scary, trying to work with people, because there's a lot at stake. But if we stick with the safe ones, treat what you see, pay attention to dosage, be a little extra paranoid the first trimester. Once you get through that first trimester, you still need to be cautious with our herbs, avoiding the toxic herbs or the purgy herbs or the spasmy herbs. But generally, once we're into the second trimester, we can kind of breathe a sigh of relief and look at just nourishing primarily and staying away from anything that's toxic. By the third trimester, still paying attention to toxicity, but honestly, we can relax a little bit. We never just totally relax until that baby's out and kicking and screaming, pooping and puking. All right. I think I got all of my questions and didn't even have to put in any of my own. Sometimes I sneak in more of my own than hopefully I got everybody. All right. I'm going to say, hey, y'all. It's been fun, as always, and hopefully we'll see you next month. We will do the open forum on August 25th. I hope we see you in many of our classes. I know we got a crap ton of our students on here. Remember, there will be a recording of this. I will upload it to YouTube by tomorrow sometime. Sign up and check out our... wow, that was loud. Sign up and check out our podcast, an exciting one will launch here probably by the end of next week. Flower essence classes, young person herb stuff, the cool Ayurvedic collage thingy, and the thyroid focused coolness. Check us out, all of our classes at traditionsherbschool.com, acuherbals.com to schedule an appointment in the doctor's clinic, herb clinic, or the student clinic. And I hope I see you out at some of our fun events. And check out and subscribe to our YouTube page, because I'm going to upload some cool classes, hopefully, sometime soon. Bye. How do I turn this thing off? I have no idea. There we go.